Well, hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where today's journey takes us to one of the most important years in the history of jazz. And this is 1959, because so many legendary jazz albums were released that year. One of my very favorites, Mingus one of my favorite Mingus albums, Giant Steps, Coltrane, his wonderful album on Atlantic, Kind of Blue, a legendary Miles Davis album that we all know and love, The Shape of Jazz to Come, one of the biggest sort of primogenitors of avant-garde jazz as we came to know it, Ornette Coleman, Moanin', one of the finest Art Blakey albums. The list could go on. Portrait in Jazz by Bill Evans, Cannonball Adderley live in San Francisco, and again, so many others. And the one that we're going to talk about today from this seminal year in jazz is Dave Brubeck's Time Out. Now, what made this album so notable was its use of odd time signatures, which became a sort of signature quality, pardon the pun, of Dave Brubeck's piano playing and composition throughout his career. And it was on this album that several of the tunes that he composed that became his most famous were located, namely Take Five and also Blue Rondo a la Turk, which, of course, Emerson, Lake and Palmer made their own not all that long after, although it seemed like a lifetime. Now, the thing with odd time signatures is it's very easy to just compose something mathematically and put it in an odd time signature, and the result is that the music will be ugly because the natural proclivity of most people is to think in even numbers, in your twos and fours, not your fives and your sevens and your 13s. But within every time signature is a pulse, and it's the pulse that is the linkage between a musical terminology we have, the one that I just used, pulse, and the literal anatomical nature of a pulse, something that all living creatures, well, not plant life per se, but certainly all animals have. The heart pulsates, particularly in them mammals who you might be meeting with later today. And so the key then to composing beautiful or evocative or interesting or attractive or intriguing music in an odd time signature is to create a sense of pulsation, even though intuitively we tend to think of pulsation in terms of even numbers rather than odd. Now, it's not an easy thing to do, but many of the great composers have been able to do it. In pop music, it's somewhat less common. In jazz, well, it's a mix, but Dave Brubeck really opened the door for more odd time signatures in jazz. He wasn't the first, but he was the first one to do it this prominently. And not only was he able to convince his audience that you could still have something pulsating and relatable in an odd time signature in this jazz idiom, but Take Five became one of the most recognizable melody heads of all time. You've even if you've never heard the name, which some of you may not have, and even if you loathe jazz, you have heard Take Five. You've heard the melody of Take Five. And that really takes a lot of talent because while the jazz world has so the jazz world goes in sort of ebbs and spurts or whatever the terminology is. Sometimes jazz defines popular music. I mean, that was really in the 1920s and somewhat in the 30s and frankly into the 40s with big band music. Then it recedes, then it comes back to really influence the popular world, then it retreats. In the 70s, jazz fusion, I would say, the fusion of sort of funk, soul, rock and jazz helped bring it to the forefront. In the later part of the 80s, a very watered down version of sort of pop music, but played by ex-jazz musicians, people like Kenny G. I know, brought somewhat of that idiom back, but it was really interesting what was happening in the 50s because jazz was in many ways at its most experimental in the 50s before it got either fully avant-garde or fully fused into other musical idioms like rock or funk or soul. So if the story of jazz in the late 60s and early 70s was a division between fusing with other genres and going into the ever more avant-garde, in the late 50s there was this comfortable medium where it was becoming more avant-garde, but still very listenable to the person willing to devote even some level of attention to the music beyond what it would take to listen to Take Good Care of My Baby. Not that there's anything wrong with that. So, um, I highly recommend this album. It's one of those albums that you'll see on the list of best albums that are curated even by people who know nothing about jazz. But in this case, they got it right because this album was beloved across connoisseurs of different genres. So congratulations to Dave Brubeck and his wonderful band that was on this album. All of them wonderful, wonderful musicians. Enjoy the music as many have over the years. If you like this odd time signature discussion, make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.